Hi everybody, and thank you again for watching another episode of Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at these lightweight fixtures from Zolar. This is the Blade 60. 60 because it's 60 centimeters, Blade because it is as thin as a blade. All right, so these lights boast 6 light engines or pixel zones. They have an RGB amber white light engine, which gives the lights a CCT range from 2000 Kelvin all the way up to 20,000 Kelvin with green magenta capabilities. They boast all of the advanced color modes that you'd expect from a top-end light. They also have built-in CRMX. They are weather resistant. They have amazing color scores as high as 92 SSI, and they cost as little as $900 each. All right, so I'm going to start off the review by doing a bit of a comparison to another light. I don't like comparing other lights with other lights in gear reviews because I like you to make up your own mind about what's good and what's not. But the reason I'm doing a comparison here today is to give you some idea of the concept of this light. All right, so to compare it to something else, I'm going to compare it to an Amaran F21C. And this is a very good light. I do own 2 of these and I own 4 of the F22Cs. Very good lights, very impressed with them. All right, so the advantage that this sort of thing has is it's a very lightweight form factor. So in terms of sticking it on a boom arm or a menace arm, very, very nice product to do that with because there's next to no weight. Now, in terms of disadvantages with these, assuming that you want both lights to be in packages like this, which are small and easy to transport, the disadvantage with something like this is you've got to build it. So you've got to put your frame system on the back, and then you've got to put your softbox on the front with its diffuser. So there are quite a few steps in the process of getting it ready to use on set. So it's not the fastest light to set up. Of course, you could already have it pre-built, but then it doesn't fit in a small bag. Zolar have tried to bridge that gap between having a solid fixture and having a fixture that's lightweight enough to put on a boom arm. But here's sort of the concept that they're going with. In terms of assembling this, all you need to do is get your Kino style ball mount plate, put that onto the back of the light, and you're ready to go. Okay, so you know, this is lightweight enough that you can put it on a boom arm, put it on a C-stand arm as a backlight, for example. So it's bridging that gap between your traditional sort of hard lights, hard frame lights, which are very, very heavy, and your lightweight matte lights. All right, so I've taken a few bits of data with the 2 lights so we can do a comparison. All right, so the reason I'm comparing this to the F21 is both lights are the same form factor, 2x1. Both lights have exceptionally good quality of light coming out of them. Both have DMX capability. The F21, you require a USB-C adapter. The Zolar here has built-in CRMX. Both lights are lightweight. Both lights are very affordably priced. I think this is less than $650 and this one's around $900. And both lights use about the same amount of power draw. The first stat we'll have a look at is the weight. Now I just want to verify that this weight does not include the controllers or the head leads. All right, so the Zolar is quite lightweight at a little bit over 4 kilograms, but if you have a look at the Amaran F21, that comes in at just a little bit over 1.5 kilograms. Now I just want to clarify, that's 1.5 kilograms fully built. That was with the external frame on, the softbox on, everything on it, 1.5 kilograms. Now the next stat to look at is the power draw. Both have very similar power draw. Both lights can run off a single V-mount battery just mounted directly onto the controller. Now, before we get into the last stat, which is brightness, I just want to point out that the diffusion on this light isn't very dense. You can actually see the LEDs through it. So when I did the brightness comparison, I used the Amaran F21 with its lightest diffusion to get a very fair comparison. Now, as you can see here, the Zolar's coming in at over double the brightness. Now, the maximum advertised power draw for this light is 140 watts. Now, I've actually measured it in at 140.7, so close enough. All right, let's start getting into the negatives. And the first negative I have is with the mounting plate here. Okay, so it uses your sort of Kino Flow mounting plate. Now, these mounts have a release pin here to disconnect the mount from the light. So here's my negative. The release pin hole is only on the one side. It's not on the other side as well. So if it's put on the correct way up, it will lock into place, okay? But if you've got someone who's a relative new player to the industry, they could put this on the wrong way up And at this point, they might think it's locked, but they might discover that it is not. Okay, so that's a little bit of a negative from me. That is something you could fix with a drill, you know, if you really were fussy about it. Okay, let's get into the next negative. The controller is not weather protected. The next thing for me is the head lead. So the head lead is made of PVC cable. I'm not a huge fan of PVC cable because it has memory effect on it. It's very hard to get it to lay flat. The next possible negative for some of you might be the diffusion. You can actually see the LEDs behind the diffuser. Now, the reason for this is because the light is so thin. If they put the diffuser further away, that would have added to weight. So they made the decision to keep it thin, keep it lightweight, and sacrifice a little bit of that diffusion quality. I think that's only really going to be an issue if you're shooting something reflective. You'll definitely see the LEDs, but if you're not shooting something that's reflective, the diffusion here does mix everything together just enough to give you one light source. The next negative is the diffusion is easily scratched and marked, so I'd suggest transporting it in some sort of a bag all the time. And the last negative for me is the dimming. It does dim very well, but it's one of those lights where if you're trying to do a fade to black, it'll get down really close and then suddenly turn off. Let's get into the pros. The head is weather resistant regardless of what angle you have it operating on. The controller, although it's not weather resistant, does have built-in CRMX lumen radio. The head lead is a very nice 8 meters long, so you can get it easily onto a boom arm, no problem at all. The system can run off a single V-mount battery, which can mount directly onto the back. The light itself has 6 pixel zones. Now, these pixel zones can be operated via DMX. The light engine is RGBAW amber white, so it has a large CCT range from 2000 Kelvin up to 10,000 Kelvin with plus minus green magenta capabilities, and it has all of the advanced color modes that you'd hope to get in any top-end light. It's got an advanced HSI mode, which really takes things to the next level. Not only can you select the Kelvin by which you desaturate to, but you can desaturate in 2 decimal points of accuracy. And you can select your color hue with 1 decimal place. You can select the curve at which the light tracks to. You can track to the Planckian or black body curve, you can track to the daylight curve, and there are camera curves that you can track to. The lights are modular, so it has multi-panel configuration, and the big plus for people doing interviews, there are no cooling fans in the system. It is totally silent running. And the last pro for me, particularly at 5600 Kelvin, is the color render and color accuracy. Okay, let's go through how much things cost and what you get for your money. So first off, I'm going to start off with some of the accessories just to get them off the table, but it's also important to note that these guys do have accessories for these lights. So many manufacturers release a brand new light and they don't release accessories at the same time, and it's really frustrating and really dumb. Okay, so first thing we're going to have a look at is this double mount, which sells for $39 US. All right, so it's got a lot of hollowed out sections here to reduce the weight. Now, it's a screw thread sort of configuration to mount to the lights, so that is a little bit time consuming. It would have been nice if it had, say, quarter twist lock or something like that. Figuring out which screw hole to use is actually quite straightforward because they have a little diagram of which orientation for the lights that screw hole is for, so you can use it for horizontal and vertical orientation of 2 panels. Now, in addition to the plate, it also comes with 2 of these joiners which lock into the side of the body, giving you a very solid mount. And there are also 3 points at which you can rig the mount that comes with the light, so no additional mount is required, so very straightforward to use. Next up, we have a 60-degree honeycomb and a 30-degree honeycomb. So these sell for $49 each, and it's a metal honeycomb, it's not a plastic. If I do have one criticism of these, it's that they don't store in the bags. So I've tried storing them in the bags, it looks like they'll fit, but if you do that, it does damage, particularly the 30-degree unit here, it does give it a little bit of damage. So I haven't figured out a way to store these. They're not sold with any sort of storage solution. They come in a cardboard box. You can get them into here, but again, there is the risk of some damage if the bag gets knocked or compressed. The next negative for me is, again, they are screw in, so it does take a little bit of time to put them in place, but once they're in place, they're solid and they're not going to come out. Now let's have a look at the light kit itself. So it sells for around $900. So for that, $900 US. So for that, it comes in a bag. Now the bag is quite well constructed. Inside the bag, it splits into two sections. So the top section holds the light. All right, so let's take the light out and have a look at that. So the light is a metal construction with the exception of the diffusion. And that makes sense because this thing is weather protected. It doesn't have any air vents. The metal housing must work as the heat sink as well. Now on the corners, you've got threads. So that'll mount to your spigots or to your clamps. And you've got the threads front, back, top and side. Okay, so that's on each corner. And you've also got additional thread points on the back here in conjunction with the Kino style mount plate. And it does use an IP rated connector here. So the head is IP66 rated, the controller is not. Okay, let's have a look in the rest of the bag. So you've got the controller here. So the controller can mount to your stand via a V-mount clamp. Now that doesn't come in the kit, but you can find loads of things like that online easy enough. Now, in addition to that, you've also got this extendable little hook here for putting this onto a light stand. On the bottom of the controller, you've got your DMX in and your DMX out, which is 5-pin XLR. On the top, you've got a 3-pin XLR inlet for your power supply, and you've got the output for the light. The next thing I'll pull out of the kit is the power supply. Now, the power supply does have a V-mount connection on the back, so you can put it onto the battery plate on the back of the controller and plug it straight in, so it's all one nice contained unit. You also get IEC lead to your regional connector, so that's your power cable. And you get a nice long 8-meter head lead. Now it is made of PVC plastic, that's my only drawback on it, but it does have nice weatherproof connectors. And the last thing in the kit is the stand mount, which is a 360-degree rotatable gooseneck ball mount, Kino Flow style. It will work with junior and baby pin, and a nice little addition here is it does have a ratchet handle on the screw connection here. Now let's have a look at how the light performs with nothing attached. And as you would expect, it has a good wide beam, but it doesn't feel as wide as other panel lights that I'm used to using. The results are the same regardless of the CCT that you dial in. And the shadow qualities are what I would expect from a 2x1. Now let's have a look with the 60-degree honeycomb. And it would be interesting to see if this honeycomb mixed with this light diffuser results in any artifacting. And as far as I can see, the answer is no. Again, regardless of the CCT you dial in, the results are the same. The results are the same also regardless of the colour that you dial in. And it all merges together to give you the one soft shadow. Now let's take a look with the 30-degree honeycomb, and let's see if this in combination with the lighter diffuser gives any artifacting. And the answer is yes. If you really look for it, you can see a little bit of texture in this light, but I honestly doubt that it would be an issue on location. I only know it's there because I'm really looking for it. Again, the results are the same regardless of the CCT that you dial in. And it all merges together to give you the one soft shadow. Okay, let's talk about the DMX now. So one thing I really like about these lights is when they receive DMX, on the screen comes up a DMX page. So it tells you what mode you're in, what your DMX address is, and all of the instructions that are currently going through the light. So if you needed to, you could use that page to program a profile. Okay, so the DMX goes in through the bottom hardwired. We've got 5-pin in and out, and you can set a termination on this internally if you want. And it's also got the built-in CRMX. Okay, so there's 20 profiles in there. That should be enough to keep any DMX board operator happy. You've got your typical loss of behavior options, such as hold the last command, go to black, or go to black after 2 minutes. You've got remote device management. You can run a reduced channel mode. You can use the DMX outlets as a master and slave mode. You've got a choice of crossfade or direct for your transitions. So that's like a smoothing option. Next down, you've got a termination on or off. So you can set the output to terminate so that the signal stops at the last light in the chain. It doesn't bounce back down the line and give you any interference. And you've got your CRMX submenu, so you can link and unlink the light. Okay, let's get into the DMX testing. I have the Zolar receiving its DMX commands off its internal CRMX receiver. It is set to an 8-bit CCT HSI crossover profile. Its crossfade is turned on, which is what they call their smoothing, and the dimmer curve is set to linear. To give you something to compare it to, I have a SkyPanel S60C. The SkyPanel is receiving its commands via an external CRMX receiver. It is also set to an 8-bit CCT HSI crossover profile, and its dimmers are set to linear. Now, just to note, this is not a brightness comparison. The SkyPanel does have an ND3 on the front. Let's start the testing with instant on-off commands. Now I'm going to repeat that test, but this time I'm going to set the crossover to direct on the Zolar and see if that makes a difference. Now for the rest of the testing, I'll switch it back to crossover. Now let's have a look at some half-second cues. Now let's have a look at some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And now for some 5-second cues. Now let's do some changeovers between 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. Now for some 5-second cues. Now for some changeovers between a CCT and a color hue, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second changeovers. Now for some 1 second changeovers. Now for some 2.5 second changeovers. And finally, some 5 second changeovers. Okay, let's start going through the data I've collected on these units, starting off with the AC power draw. The maximum power draw recorded over several days of testing was 140.7 watt. At 3200 Kelvin, it was pulling 120 watt, and at 5600 Kelvin, it was pulling 138 watt. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics. According to my frequency meter, this light is running scattered pulse width modulation at 24,736 Hz. But the interesting thing here is even with a shutter speed in excess of 1/17,000th of a second, I can't actually capture any flicker. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics at 3200 Kelvin. I've taken readings at 100%, 50%, 25%, 10% and 5%. As you can see, the CCT is incredibly accurate. The maximum difference is only 23 Kelvin. There is a slight change in the TM30RF color render scores from 94 to 93, but here's the interesting bit. The white point, or delta UV, hardly shifts. In fact, the maximum difference is only plus or minus 0.0003 delta UV, which would be imperceivable without a color spectrometer. Now let's have a look at the results at 5600 Kelvin. And just for giggles, I've also added 1% brightness into this. There is a little bit more deviation in the CCT, but nothing you wouldn't notice unless you had a meter. The TM30 color render scores are a constant 97. And once again, the white point hardly shifts. That means there's no noticeable green or magenta shift as you dim. Now let's have a look at the average CCT accuracies. So I've taken readings at every Kelvin point from 2000 up to 6000 Kelvin, where I stopped taking individual measurements. Now let's have a look at the color render measured in TM30RF. Now I've split this information into two sections. First, we're starting off with 2000 Kelvin up to 3450 Kelvin, because this section has the most deviation. As you can see, the higher the Kelvin, the higher the color render score. Now let's take a look from 3500 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, where I stopped taking individual readings. As you can see, the scores here are very impressive. Now let's have a look at the average delta UV, or white point of the lights. Now the first set of readings are taken with the light set to the black body or Planckian curve. Between 2000 and 3000 Kelvin, it is out by its maximum with an average of minus 0.0020, which is only just less than the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. Between 3050 to 4000 Kelvin, it is still tracking under the Planckian curve with an average delta UV of minus 0.0013, which means at this point the light is typically magenta to somewhere close to the equivalent of 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. Now from 4050 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin, this light tracks incredibly accurately to the Planckian curve. Now let's have a look at the results for the daylight curve. Now up to 4000 Kelvin, this light is tracking to the Planckian curve. From 4050 to 5000 Kelvin, it starts to deviate upwards, so it doesn't have an average. Now between 5050 to 6000 Kelvin, this light is tracking well above the Planckian curve, but still below the daylight curve with an average delta UV of plus 0.0022. And from 6050 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin, it starts to track its way back down to the Planckian curve. Let's have a closer look at the CCTs, starting off with the lowest CCT that we can dial in. When I dialed in 2000 Kelvin, I got 1978. The TM30 colour render results were 88% average colour accuracy with an average 108% colour saturation. With the CRI scores, only R11 is below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0014. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3177 with an SSI score of 88. The TM30 colour render results were 94% average colour accuracy with an average 105% colour saturation. With the CRI scores, R4 and R11 are both below 90. It has a very funky looking spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0012, which would make the light at this point, without any green correction, magenta to roughly the equivalent of 1/2 of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4435. The TM30 colour render results were 96% average colour accuracy with an average 103% colour saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is incredibly accurate with a delta UV of minus 0.0001. Now with the light set to the black body or Planckian curve and dialed into 5600 Kelvin, I got 5605 with an SSI score of 91. The TM30 colour render results were an average 97% colour accuracy with an average 103% colour saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point again was crazy accurate with a delta UV of plus 0.0001. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin with the light set to track to the daylight curve, I got 5589 with a very solid SSI score of 92. The TM30 colour render results were a very impressive 97% average colour accuracy with an average 102% colour saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. In fact, they're all plus 93. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0023, which has it tracking way above the Planckian curve, but it's still just below the daylight curve. Here are some results at 7000, 8000 and 9000 Kelvin. When I dialed in 10,000 Kelvin, I got 10,296. The TM30 colour render results were 91% average colour accuracy with an average 104% colour saturation. Here are the CRI results, and 7 of them are below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is still tracking to the Planckian curve with a delta UV of minus 0.0008. Now here are some results between 11,000 and 19,000 Kelvin. And just a note, from 18,000 Kelvin upwards, there are no TM30 colour render scores because this Kelvin is outside the range of the test. When I dialed in the top Kelvin of 20,000, I got 21,341. This is outside of the range of a TM30 colour render test. Here are the CRI scores. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is still tracking to the Planckian curve with a delta UV of plus 0.0002. Okay, let's have a look at how accurately these lights can dial in their colour vectors. When I dialed in 0 degrees, which should be red, I got 0 degrees. When I dialed in 120 degrees, which should be green, it was smack on 120 degrees. When I dialed in blue, or 240 degrees, I got 241. When I dialed in 60 degrees or yellow, I got 51 degrees. But I'd recommend dialing something in between 34 and 35. When I dialed in 180 degrees or cyan, I got 187 degrees. And when I dialed in 300 degrees or magenta, I got 309. Okay, so my closing thoughts on this product, I'll be keeping these. I can see me using these as backlights on interviews. They're lightweight enough to get out on a boom arm, and with the honeycombs, I can contain that backlight. I think they're going to be quite nice for something like that. I do feel they're probably, as a 2x1, a bit small to use as a far side key on a boom arm, but I think as a backlight, it would be pretty good. In terms of the pixel mode, or the pixels, I think I'd just use the fire effect here. That's probably all I'd use in the pixels. I'm not really big on that sort of thing, but the real big winner for me is the fact that they have CRMX. Anything with CRMX is a real winner for me, and I have nothing with CRMX in this form factor, so that's why I'll be keeping them. Look, they're definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but for me, they seem to fill a niche. I'm Andrew Locke. See you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear.